Good evening, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. My name is Father Frank Taruwona of the Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuits. Today I'm going to be talking about contemplation, which is a form of prayer, a Christian spiritual practice of engaging the imagination and the senses to picture ourselves in stories, especially in scriptural passages from the Bible. Much of my focus is on attempting to demonstrate that this practice is actually inherently human. This practice of engaging your imagination spiritually, it is an inbuilt human capacity which is not only found in us as Christians, but it is found in humans in general. This is important as a point of dialogue between Christians and people of other faiths, and it is also important in the dialogue between Christianity and non-believers and atheists, between Christianity and the secular world. And this goes in line with 1 Peter 3 verse 15, which encourages us to be ready to defend our faith, to be ready to have a defense for our lifestyle, our spiritual lifestyle. Whereby when we're saying, why do we complicate? Why do we contemplate? Why do we use scriptures? We should have reasons which even go to touch those people who might not even have access to the Bible or to the Christian belief. Then later in the presentation, I will then give points to follow when practicing this simple but rich art of prayer. So I've entitled my presentation, Contemplation as Tapping into our Perpetual Childhood. So this is a reflection on contemplation basing on the position of Matthew 8 verse 3. So Matthew 18 verse 3. Matthew 18 verse 3 says, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So from this verse, which I'm saying it is our ground for understanding contemplation, we're going to be asking ourselves, so what is this childhood which Jesus is talking about? And why is it important? And how is it connected to contemplation? What is contemplation? And why do we even bother use the scriptures for contemplation? So contemplation, as I have already said, this is our capacity to use our imagination and to use our senses in the use of the Bible, of Scripture. So contemplation is actually based on the human power for imagination. So the power for imagination is also our human capacity for perpetual childhood, our human capacity for perpetual playfulness. You know, when you're imagining, you're actually playing around with reality. You are ignoring your immediate moment of reality, and you are thinking of a possible reality which is not actually happening right now. And this is actually the source for all our creativity. When we're talking about the playfulness of children, we're actually addressing the capacity of children to practically create a fantasy world. They do it themselves because playfulness is inbuilt. So children, from the word go, they have the capacity to be playful. It is not taught, although they are also guided by the fairy tales and the games which adults create for them. Because even adults, because they continue having in themselves the inner capacity for playfulness and for childhood, that is what they then share with the real children. So adults are big children because they have the capacity to be playful, as I shall explain. And children are just children, and all of us eventually we are playful. Playfulness is very important in childhood development, and it continues with us into maturation. A child deprived of play is also deprived of development, deprived of being fully human. And this also applies to bigger children with the adults. So, because once a child, always a child. So losing our playfulness because you now say we are now grown up, if we lose our playfulness, if we lose our childhood, our inner childhood, we are losing what is fundamentally human about us. And that is why even when married people lose their playfulness, they may even lose their love for one another, and they may even lose their marriage, and they may even lose their family. So that is why even grown-ups, even married people, they continue to kiss one another. They continue to hug one another. I mean, even within marriage setup, I mean, foreplay is a very important part of maintaining marriage, which means something about playfulness is essential when we need to maintain our peace of mind and when we need to develop our relationship with other people. Otherwise, without this playfulness, without this childhood, this perpetual childhood, we were not going to have things like architecture. Because I mean, architecture is playing around with the idea of shelter. We could just be staying in caves, but we play around with different designs because that's playfulness, that's childhood playing within us. The imagination of playfulness, the imagination that comes with our inner childhood. We are not going to have music because music is playing around with the idea of communication. So you want to communicate in a not so obvious way, in a more beautiful way. So you sing, you listen to music, and we wouldn't have inventions because I mean, what's the point of having computers if we can just maybe stay with one another in the same place? So the idea of the internet, the computers, this is all the playfulness, the creativity of saying, yes, I can talk to the person next to me, but what if there is a possibility of talking to somebody on the other side of the planet? This starts as playfulness, and then the playfulness creates a deep reality. And that is also, we can even give another example, the issue of recipes. If we really want to live a basic life, we just find ourselves maybe going into the forest, just picking fruits and eat them, eat vegetables raw. We kill an animal and eat the flesh. But recipes is the playfulness of saying, but what if I attempt to cook this food this way? And then you come up with recipes, you come up with delicacy. That is all playfulness, whereby it's not only about just seeing the fruits on the table, but it's about now saying, but if I deal with these fruits this way or that way, what can come out of that? Creativity, playfulness, the childhood in us. So basically I would also say we have tools for basic needs. I mean, if I want to do farming, I can look for a tractor. But if I want to engage what I consider as the transcendental needs, that is my capacity, for instance, to love deeply, my capacity to continue growing in joy, I need perpetual childhood, because the perpetual childhood is a tool in itself which connects with my transcendentality, my ability to grow beyond the obvious. So when Jesus is saying, be like children, this is an invitation to a maturation which goes beyond the sense of adulthood. We are saying, if you are an adult, you need to actually mature more and more until you become a child, like Jesus is saying. Because in that childhood, you become less compelled by the carefulness of life to say, no, I just need to be rigid in my life and have things ordered. And make sure that I have maybe basic food on the table. The playfulness allows you to get into that realm whereby you can actually say, well, yes, I know I can provide for my family the basic food which they need, but occasionally I can buy them maybe some chocolates, because you don't really need chocolates, but it is the playfulness which brings the family together. And that is what Jesus is saying. Don't just think of providing. So when sometimes when parents are actually now saying, you're being too flamboyant. Why do we need this? Sometimes you might realize, yes, flamboyance might be bad, but there is always a need to go beyond the basics once in a while. That is why, yes, it is okay to stay in your house, but if you have a chance, if there is a chance to go maybe for a holiday, that playfulness brings people together. Yes, you can reproduce and have children, but just kissing without reproducing is also good. It brings love. It makes the love deeper and bigger as well. So that is the playfulness, the childhood, which allows imagination, which is the source of imagination, which Jesus is inviting us to say, imagine beyond your immediate. So if you consider all this, then you then wonder, so why is it that the secular world, the atheistic world, is against religion? I mean, like in this case, you're saying it's against creativity. And we're saying creativity is dependent on playfulness. So if we're saying contemplation is playfulness, why would the secular world laugh at you when you're contemplating on scripture? But I would like to start by looking at how the world lost religion gradually. The secular world lost touch with religion. Part of it was justified. I mean, if you consider religious wars, terrorism, it's justifiable when somebody might say, okay, I'm done with religion. But also there is something also very important historically, especially during after the Middle Ages, in the Enlightenment era. During those centuries, science was growing strong, philosophy was growing strong, and it was critiquing the idea of religion. And when that was happening, then Industrial Revolution started. And when Industrial Revolution started, then people were now no longer, the individual was no longer the focus. The focus was now on the profit of the profit makers, which means the masses of people were now just machines. They would be made to work for a long period of the time, and then when they get home, they don't have time for playfulness. They are already tired. They need to rest. They don't have time for family. They don't have time for holidays. They are earning very low, so they cannot even afford to treat their children well. To give their children some good treats, because it's all about making ends meet. Then once industrialization is happening, then we have massive urbanization. Too many people coming from the villages. I mean, in the villages, everybody knows each other, and you also have enough space around you to play around, to imagine. You get into the woods, you get to the river, you reflect on the river, the playfulness. But now people are now urbanized. There are many of them in the city. There's no more room for there is no more room for fun. There's no more room for playfulness, because it's now business and business and business, and that's all. Once all that was happening, then we have dictatorship coming into play. We have so dictatorship comes, and there is no more respect for any individual. They are going to be controlled and used as long as if the dictators are going to protect, safeguard their power. And that is also the other reason why we lost playfulness. And when you lose playfulness, you are also in the process of losing religion, because we are saying in this case, if prayer is based on our capacity for playfulness, for thinking beyond our immediate, when dictatorship, when corruption, when human-made suffering takes place, then you don't have the space for entertainment, for playfulness, for being a child, because you are now only specifically an adult who is making ends meet. And that is also was the evil of Leninism and Stalinism. This was communism, whereby, as I was saying earlier, communism was about focusing on profit. Now with communism, with Stalinism, we're now saying the focus was on protect and connect with God. Now when you're left with yourself to maybe say, I can at least talk to Jesus, and then this Jesus has been rubbished by atheism, you are now left to suffer without any ideological or spiritual cushion to protect you from total breakdown. So these are some of the reasons why. So why secularism? Why Christianity was attacked by secularism? That is pretty much historical. And now Matthew 18 verse 16 then tells us, but if anyone causes one of these little ones of mine to stumble, it will be better for them to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. What this means is that the systems which have destroyed the childhood, because if our childhood is made to fall, if we have now been deprived of the childhood, the system, it means even our society has been deprived of any creativity, has been deprived of the childhood which is necessary for imagination. And when that then happens, that is when you realize communism in Russia did not help. When the Western world was progressing, there was stagnation in the Stalinist Russia, because it was a system. So as a system, it eventually collapsed. Why was it collapsing? Because it is better for such a system which destroys the childhood in us. It is better for such a system to be drowned in the depth of the sea. And that is what we also hope, that all the dictators in our countries, all the politicians who are being corrupt and who are killing our people, who are killing the childhood in us, well, somehow, we hope, maybe through elections might become large millstones hung around them, and then they fall into the depths of loss of power. Let's hope so. So that is our hope now, that Jesus is seeing our childhood is being lost, our imaginativeness is being lost, because you're now just focusing on our hunger. If you're hungry, you don't have the capacity, the energy to be playful. And now Jesus is saying, it will be better for those who are causing it to be drowned in the depths of the sea. So but anyway, still we see the hypocrisy of the secular world, because you're saying the secular world, as I was saying, it was criticizing Christianity as a source, as wishful thinking, if I would say, as something which is not necessary for basic survival. Of course, they themselves, as I have already noted like through communism, that it collapsed, it crashed. When capitalism was so much against the well-being of people and focusing more on profit, again it backfired with time. So, but yet at the same time, the secular world is not entirely even against the idea of this playfulness, which is the foundation of contemplation, of prayer. It is not against that foundation, because whilst you are saying, like for us, we have scriptures, we have stories in the Bible to build us, we are also now saying within the secular world, we see Hollywood flourishing. There is a lot of, they do a lot of animation, sci-fi movies and all that. That is creativity. They talk about the superhero movies. When you realize most of the superhero movies, one of my friends was telling me this idea to say, oh, the superhero movies and most of the movies as we have it, they have the basic idea of fighting, the fight between good and evil, the temporary victory of evil and the ultimate victory of good. So the superhero represents, especially the superheroes who are constantly beaten, when they eventually win, it's more like the same idea of Jesus, who is temporarily persecuted, killed, but he resurrects. He becomes a victory over sin and death. So if you consider all that, then we're now saying, it seems like the secular world, after condemning the religious world, after condemning our scriptures, they are seeming to be creating an alternative but which is fundamentally the same at the end, because ultimately the superhero movies, you can actually use it as a way of reflecting on the story of Jesus Christ. So, and they continue to have, it's a secular world, but it goes to watch soccer. They go to play sports. And what is that? Sports are also a meta-narrative. They are also a narrative. They are also a playfulness to represent it's playing house. We are saying a team of soccer is trying to represent through play the idea of humans coming together, working together, cooperating for a goal. And if now Christianity comes with a story which encourages people to come together and love one another, then we're saying, no, it's wishful thinking, but simply because it's a story. But we are saying, even within the secular world, they are having different forms of alternative narratives, and they are okay with them simply because they are not from the Bible and they are not from the spiritual world. Then I would also give an example of architecture. I think I've already mentioned it, yeah, but I'll just return to it, because they would condemn to say why we have buildings, but we are saying the church, the basilicas, the beautiful church buildings, they inspire the deep idea of grandeur, of divine grandeur, which then inspires people to think more and to imagine themselves becoming more. And that is also the reason why people will be inspired by just being, for instance, in Dubai, being there in the Burj Khalifa, because the grandeur of architecture, it is a playfulness, it is an imagination which is there, which has been done by somebody to encourage other people to imagine and to wish more than the basic. Otherwise, we would all be staying maybe in just rectangular prisms. So the secular world, we should be careful when the secular world is criticizing us, because at the end we're just saying, if we give in to them, we are killing what is fundamentally human. Yet the secular world itself is trying to find ways of replacing what they condemned with exactly an idea of what they were condemning. The idea of powerful, you watch Harry Potter, you watch all those, the Game of Thrones, the idea of the good fighting the evil and all that, what you find in the Bible. And that is why some very few good scientists, some very few spiritual scientists, like for instance Albert Einstein, would even say, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. So it's not enough to brush the Bible aside and say, it's just fairy tales. It's not enough to brush aside the idea of Christianity and say, it's just fairy tale, because if the likes of great minds like Albert Einstein are seeing the beauty of fairy tales, the importance of fairy tales, I think they are more clever and more intelligent than most of us who can criticize the fairy tales and the religious stories. And then they also say, and he also says, when I examine myself and my methods of thought, I come to the conclusion that the gift of fantasy has meant more to me than any talent of abstract, positive thinking. That's again Albert Einstein. So why? Because this is the playfulness. If you consider right now, most of what we are having as technology was once wishful thinking. But because it was being gradually built in human playfulness, human imagination, with time ultimately we have it. Who would have thought that we could talk to one another through a wireless system? This would be like witchcraft in the past. This would be considered as witchcraft in the past. But this is reality coming into play because some people had enough time to play around with the idea of childhood, of their childhood potential, which we are being invited to. Because when you're childlike, when you promote your childhood, even if you're an adult, when you promote your playfulness, then you're promoting your ability for creativity. So what would I say? So in here we're now saying, before I get to the last part in which I give you an example of Ignatian contemplation, I would say in our imagination, in our playfulness, there are two forms of imagination which leads to playfulness. There's the playfulness which I've already mainly emphasized, which brings about creativity, which brings about novelty, which brings about civilization. Thinking to say, our reality is not enough, we can have more. What if this happens? What if we wire two ends together? Can't we come with a phone idea? What if we actually break those wires? Can't we come with a wireless phone network? These are people who are creatively childlike. These are children in heart, and within that childhood of theirs, they are creative. But the creativeness of contemplation now is again somewhat even more unique than this creative imagination. So contemplation, the imagination of contemplation is now about finding myself in a story, so that if I find myself in a story and I imagine myself in that story, I end up getting the values which I emulate from that story. It's more like sometimes we have role models around us, and when we are emulating them, we are acting ourselves as if we are them. We are acting as if we are them. But then we can also go further and say, when I read a good novel and I find an interesting character, a very noble character, if I follow that noble character, I might not end up bringing up anything new in the world, but that reading of that character can make me emulate that person, that character, so that the good characteristics gradually become mine. So when we watch movies, that is also the same thing. I watch a good movie. That good movie, the hero in the movie can be an inspiration in my life. And actually, that fantasy of imagining myself in the story has even been heightened by the contemporary idea of the 3D movies and other probably even better versions than 3D, whereby you are watching and you actually feel the experience as if you are actually in the movie itself. And when you feel like that, and we are saying, if that feeling has been heightened by the 3D, we are also hoping that that 3D dimension has also heightened your capacity to be motivated by those positive individuals in those movies. So as we have seen, what I've shown so far is that there is really no much difference so far with between the imaginativeness of the secular world and the imaginativeness of Christianity, Christian reading when we are reading the Bible. Because just like someone might be inspired by Batman, much of the world has been inspired by Jesus. And Jesus is more of a hero than the superheroes who might inspire those individuals. Denzel Washington, you can think of many other contemporary great actors who have inspired the world. And we're saying, okay, the same thing. Christians are inspired by saintly figures. Christians are inspired by the apostles and all. So ultimately, and this inspiration, as I was saying, it comes from the playfulness. I want to act as if, that's playing house. When children are playing house, the child is playing, I'm the father. The other one is saying, I'm the mother. And we are now saying, when you're watching a movie, you are imagining yourself, I can be Denzel Washington. Even when you're grown up, you want to change and become like him. You're inspired by him, you wish to act like him, to live like him. And that is also exactly the same thing again, which happens in Christianity, which I then consider as divine playing house. When we are now saying we are actually intending to emulate God by closely following the God in the scriptures, closely following the Jesus in the scriptures. And so we now come to the final part of our conversation, Ignatian Contemplation. So Ignatian Contemplation, St. Ignatius of Loyola came about with the idea of contemplation. And that's what we're going to look at. And that is, so it is called Ignatian Contemplation, and I'm also calling it Divine Playing House. So what happens in Ignatian Contemplation? What happens in Divine Playing House? He says that when you're reading a biblical story, let's say you're reading maybe the parable of the sower or any other which you wish, allow the biblical story, the events in the biblical story, to be present to you right now, just like in a 3D movie. So when that is happening, you are visualizing everything in that story as if it's a movie. So it's like you're making a movie. You're paying attention to all detail. What are you seeing? You are using your sense of sight. What are you seeing? What are the people around? What are they wearing? You also use the sense of sound. How do their voices sound like? This is really playing house here. And when they are eating, how does the food taste? Maybe when Jesus has multiplied bread and you have gotten something, maybe you have imagined yourself to be one of the people in the crowd. When you receive the fish and the bread, how does it taste? And how does it feel coming from Jesus? How does it smell? When there's a cool breeze, when you're standing next to Jesus on the mountain or next to the seashore, how does it feel? And all the other feelings which you can consider there. How are you feeling? Are you angry against the Pharisees? Are you just happy because you are with Jesus? This is the imagination, or this is like the same way children do when they are imagining when they are by themselves, the playfulness. And this is also what we as grown-ups sometimes do. When you're imagining, even when as a grown-up, you're imagining your partner who is not around. Maybe the one whom you love is far away. Maybe your family is far away. You can imagine what is happening to them. You hear that they are suffering in another country. Let's say, maybe, for example, Zimbabwe. Maybe some cruel politicians are destroying them, are shooting them. You imagine the suffering. You even envision the suffering. You're playing house, because this is a reality which you are not living right now, but you can have it and it changes you. When Jesus is on the cross, is nailed, you can imagine how does he feel? You can imagine you might be the Mary Magdalene. How are you feeling as Mary Magdalene? So you put yourself in the story, you imagine yourself to be one of the people in the story, or probably a bystander observing the people in the story, but you are in the story. So when all that happens, when you lose yourself in the story, you realize that contemplation is not simply about remembering a gospel event. You are not, when you're reading that Bible passage, you are not reading some historical facts of what happened. You are reading so that, just like any powerful story, you want it to shape you in the here and now. And that is the importance of contemplation, of divine playing house. The Holy Spirit makes present a mystery of Jesus' life in a way that is meaningful for you right now. Not to figure out what could it have been meaning there, but how does it change me right now? So use your imagination to dig deeper into the story so that God may communicate with you in a personal, evocative way. You want you want the story to talk to you. Because when the story, which is divine, talks to you, it shapes you to be more like God, to grow in His image. And the more you grow in the image of God, the more you grow in the best potential that you can be. You find yourself being inspired maybe to work harder for your family because you love them. You find yourself afterwards maybe wishing to go and reconcile with your husband, with your wife, with your children, with your friends, because you have been inspired by the Jesus who forgives, by the God who forgives. And at the end, we are now saying, you are playing house. And there is nothing stupid about that. So when we are being challenged by the secular world, I think we should just simply tell them that, no, actually we are just doing more or less what you do in your movies, in your sports, in everything that you do, in everything that we participate in. And even all those things have been inspired by our interior religious dimension, our capacity to be transcendental, to be more, our capacity to imagine beyond our immediate, which is really religious, which is really spiritual. If you can actually bring about what you have imagined and you want to put it into real life, that is more like that's akin to a miracle. That's more like miracle playing, miracle making. Because that was not there. That was not going to be there if we had not thought of it and think of bringing it on table. And but what's most important is, much as we have that kind of the result of the person who has been changed by a story, even just focusing on the process which happens just in contemplation, that is enough a change. That is enough a mystery that we should cherish, because it's not ultimately about always maybe inventing stuff. If we are inventing ourselves, if we are growing to be more in our being childlike, in our being happy, because childhood is happiness. If we grow in through contemplation, we become better people. Thank you. So I would just read one of the questions which I've received on the YouTube page. It is asking, ZCBC, that is Zimbabwean Catholic Bishops Commission, and other church bodies wrote the Zimbabwe we want. How can we as young Christians take part in changing our reality for a better society, or for a better Zimbabwe, for a better Africa? Yes, so I would also then go back to the whole idea of imagination, of going into our childhood. Like if we focus more on the suffering we are facing through, we might break down, like what was happening, especially as I was giving examples in the communist countries when they had refused Christianity and faith. But we are now saying, if you choose, for instance, to have moments to say, despite the hardships that I'm facing, let me have a moment of reinvigorating the child in me, reinvigorating the spirit in me. You were dying, but when you get into contemplation, it's a chance for you to get another life. So I don't know, maybe we can say sometimes what the leaders, the church leaders wrote in the past, maybe why was it not implemented? Maybe they were not ready after writing them. Maybe they were not ready to get out of the church and wear their religious vestments and say what we have imagined our world to be, our Zimbabwe to be. Now we want to demand of it. Now we are wearing our albs, we are wearing our stores. We are now standing in front. We are leading. The bishops in front of the demonstration, the priests, and when now the bishops and the priests are giving maybe a leadership shield, then everybody else, now all the other Christians, move. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we now need more like you, Paddington, to join maybe priesthood, so that if you become one of the religious leaders, you can be strong enough, bold enough to take those stands and say, if I'm going to be short, it's better for me as a priest or as a bishop or as a sister, it's better for me to be short than for the poor old woman who is taking care of a children or of a grandchildren from the money from tomatoes. I mean, I'm just saying, if we have you, and as confident as you are sounding to be, if we have leaders like you, maybe that can help in bringing about contemplation and seeing contemplation coming into real life. So then there is this other one, Alvin. He's saying, I had a discussion on how the Bible remains relevant in the 21st century, and this talk helped me a lot. Thank you. Okay, thank you for thanking me. Okay, so I suppose because of time, we were supposed to have this conversation for 45 minutes, and now it's 8:15, 7:15 in CAT. It has been wonderful. I hope you gained something. What I just want to say in conclusion and encouragement is let us not lose hope, especially the people who are in banana republics, who are suffering under the iron fists of the cruel ones. I'm not going to mention specific countries for political reasons, but if you know we are in such countries, let's just say African lives matter. The lives of the suffering, they matter. And let us hope that when we get into the Bible and we read and we are inspired by the image of the strong individuals such as Jesus, who could challenge the status quo, who knows, maybe one day as we shall continue to reflect, we shall find a way of changing the different regimes. But and this should come out of contemplation. But putting that aside, we are also saying, let this contemplation capacity continue to build you, so that in the future, if you are young people, when you are now in the leadership positions, you have been molded by the divine love which is found in contemplation to become benevolent leaders, different from the ones whom we have. And when that happens, maybe we shall talk about a better Africa, a better Zimbabwe, a better Nigeria. Let us continue contemplating and build ourselves in that childhood, so that when we shall take those roles, when you shall be future fathers, if you are youths who are not yet married, and you shall be future fathers, future mothers, you shall also promote the beauty of childhood in your children, in your families. And may the Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.